If the only pomegranate you've ever eaten came from a supermarket, you have never actually tasted the real thing. Those expensive perfect spheres are bred for shipping crates, not flavor. Real pomegranates are a sweet, complex treasure that once tempted gods, and the only way to experience that true taste is to grow them yourself. The good news is, despite what you've heard, unlocking this ancient secret in your own backyard is easier than you think. The sun chasers. Most garden plants have a breaking point. When the summer sun gets too high, they wither and beg for the shade. But the pomegranate is a true sun chaser. It does not just tolerate the heat, it demands it. Straight out of the gate, you need to find the sunniest spot you have. We are talking about 6 to 8 hours of direct, unfiltered light every single day. These trees were born in rough, arid landscapes, the kind of places where the temperature climbs above 85 degrees Fahrenheit and stays there for 120 days straight. While your lettuces are bolting and your hydrangeas are fainting, the pomegranate is just getting comfortable. It thrives in zones 8 through 11, soaking up that intense radiation to sweeten its fruit. They want good airflow and dry heat, much like the Mediterranean climates where they first became famous. If you try to tuck them in a damp, shady corner, they will sulk and refuse to produce. They simply need to bake. But for those of you looking at your thermometer and seeing freezing temperatures instead of heat waves, do not worry. You have been told for years that pomegranates are only for the desert, but that old rule is finally changing. The cold, hardy miracle. There is a persistent myth that if you live north of the Sun Belt, you are simply out of luck when it comes to pomegranates. For a long time, that was true. If you lived in zone 6 or 7, you were resigned to growing apples and pears while the South enjoyed their exotic reds. But nature, with a little help from dedicated nurserymen, has a way of adapting. Today, varieties like the cold hardy red have completely rewritten the map. These tough trees can withstand the chill of zones 6 through 9, bringing that Mediterranean charm to places that see regular frost. This covers a massive, healthy chunk of the country that previously had to rely on the grocery store for their fix. However, there is a small catch. Pomegranates take their sweet time to ripen, usually finishing up late in the fall. If you live in an area where autumn turns to winter overnight, you might lose the race against the frost. The smart move here is to plant them in large containers. This allows you to give them full exposure to the summer sun. But the moment the temperature drops, you can wheel them into a garage or protected porch to let the fruit finish ripening safely. It opens up a world of possibilities for northern gardeners who thought they were left out. But once you know you can grow them, the question becomes which one you should actually plant, because the most famous one is not always the best one. The wonderful standard. If you walk into any supermarket produce section today, you will see them stacked in neat pyramids, large, perfectly round, and deep red. That is the wonderful variety. It is the industry standard, the heavy lifter of the agricultural world that fills those plastic cups of arils and those bottles of expensive juice. It is reliable, sure, but it is built for commerce, designed to survive shipping crates and long storage times rather than to delight your palate. You pay a premium for them at the store, sometimes $5 a pop, for a fruit that is often more tart than sweet. When you have the freedom of your own backyard, you do not have to settle for the commercial standard. You can aim for something like the parfianca. The difference is not subtle, it is profound. It is sweeter, less acidic, and the seeds inside are so buttery soft, you barely notice them. It is like eating candy. The wonderful is built to survive a truck. The home variety is built to deliver an explosion of taste. Commercial growers cannot always afford to grow the tastiest fruit because it might bruise too easily, but you can. Why spend a fortune on a piece of fruit that has been sitting in cold storage when you can grow a superior variety just a few steps from your back door? However, picking the right tree is only the first step. Even the best variety will fail if you make the one soil mistake that pomegranates simply cannot forgive. The wet feet warning. If there is one thing a pomegranate hates more than the shade, it is wet feet. You could ignore this tree for months in a searing drought and it might just shrug. But if you leave its roots sitting in a swamp, it will give up the ghost faster than you can say, root rot. It makes sense when you think about it. If a plant is designed to thrive in 120 days of baking heat, it is not built to be drenched. It implies a constitution that prefers the dry side of life. When you first put it in the ground, you need to water it about twice a week. Think of that as helping it unpack and get settled. But once it is established, usually after that first year, you need to back off. Move to a weekly soaking and throw down a thick layer of mulch to regulate the evaporation. That is it. You do not need complex irrigation timers or daily rituals. It is a liberating way to garden. And while we are on the subject of keeping things simple, you can also stop worrying about buying those expensive bags of premium soil because the pomegranate is actually a fan of the dirt you already have. The native soil myth, modern gardening, has convinced us that our natural dirt is somehow broken. We are sold endless bags of expensive potting mix, peat moss, and conditioners, led to believe that without them, our plants are doomed to fail. The pomegranate, however, begs to differ. This is a tree that has thrived for thousands of years in some of the harshest, rockiest soils on Earth. It does not need to be coddled with a premium blend from the garden center. When you are ready to plant, you do not need to overthink it. You can simply dig a hole, place the tree, and backfill it with the same native soil you just shoveled out. It is refreshingly simple. As long as that soil does not hold standing water, the roots will push through and anchor themselves without complaint. Whether you are working with heavy clay or gritty sand, the tree will adapt. The only real luxury you need to provide is a thick layer of mulch on the surface. This mimics the natural debris of a forest floor, keeping the roots cool and retaining moisture during those long, hot spells. It is low-maintenance gardening at its finest. But while the soil is simple, feeding the tree requires a bit of restraint. There is a specific trap that many eager gardeners fall into, thinking they are helping, only to realize they have loved their harvest right out of existence. The nitrogen trap. We often love our plants to death. We assume that if a little food is good, a feast must be better. So we shower our gardens with nitrogen hoping for a miracle. But with pomegranates, that kind of generosity usually backfires. Unlike a citrus tree, which acts like a hungry teenager always demanding more fuel, the pomegranate is surprisingly modest. If you pump it full of heavy nitrogen, the tree will happily oblige you by becoming a green giant. It will shoot up, producing lush, dark green leaves and thick, vigorous branches. It will look magnificent, but you will have spent years waiting for a magnificent tree with zero fruit. You have tricked it into building a mansion of foliage while starving your harvest into non-existence. To avoid this absolute waste of effort and time, you need ruthless restraint. To get the balance right, you need to practice restraint. You can honestly get away with doing very little, but if you want to maximize your yield, wait until late winter or early spring. When the branches are bare, apply a balanced 10-10-10 fertilizer. That is all the encouragement it needs. It focuses the energy on fruit production rather than just getting taller. And frankly, you do not want it getting too tall anyway, because left to its own devices, this plant has a very different idea of what shape it should be. The bush identity. We politely call it a fruit tree, but if left to its own devices, the pomegranate reveals its true identity. It is a bush at heart, a wild, multi-stemmed survivor that wants nothing more than to become a tangled thicket. We spend so much time trying to force our garden into neat, single-trunk soldiers, like a row of apple trees in an orchard. But the pomegranate resists that regimented look. It naturally sends up sucker after sucker, trying to claim as much ground as possible. Instead of fighting nature, you are better off working with it. Allow 3, 4, or even 5 main trunks to establish themselves from the ground up. This multi-stemmed approach, often called an open vase structure, is not just aesthetic, it is practical. The fruit tends to weigh down the outer branches, hanging low like heavy ornaments. By allowing a bushy base, you create a sturdy scaffold that can hold that weight without snapping. You get a plant that looks fuller, yields more, and feels more at home in the landscape. It creates a dense green haven that feels ancient and established. But there is one major challenge everyone faces at the end of the season: getting the fruit open without covering your kitchen in stains. We have the secret to opening any pomegranate without making a mess, but you have to keep watching to see the ultimate water bowl hack. But now, let's talk about a challenge that shows up much earlier. A dense haven invites guests, and not all of them are the kind you want to see. In the old days, a few bugs were just part of the deal, but today, we tend to panic a little too quickly. The aphid standoff. In the old days, finding a bug on a leaf wasn't a crisis. It was just part of gardening. But somewhere along the line, we became terrified of nature. We see a single aphid or a spot of white scale, and we immediately reach for the spray bottle, ready to declare chemical warfare on the entire backyard. The pomegranate, however, does not need you to be its bodyguard. This is an ancient survivor we are talking about, not a delicate hothouse flower. Sure, it gets the usual suspects like mealybugs, aphids, and the occasional scale insect. But this tree has survived for centuries in harsh climates without human intervention. It is tough. If you spot a cluster of bugs on a branch tip, you do not need to douse the whole tree in poison. Just snip that branch off and move on. It is a minor nuisance, not a catastrophe. You can usually solve the problem with a sharp pair of shears rather than a bottle of pesticide. It is far better to lose 6 inches of growth than to disrupt the natural balance of your garden. Only take decisive action if the tree is young and truly under siege. Otherwise, trust its immune system. But while you should let the bugs be, there is one thing you absolutely must control, or else you will be growing fruit for the birds instead of yourself. The summer heading. Cut. There is a practical rule of thumb that many modern gardeners have forgotten. If you need a ladder to pick your fruit, you are growing it for the birds, not for yourself. We tend to look at a skyrocketing tree and think it is healthy, but in a backyard, a tree that towers 20 feet overhead is useless. You want your harvest within arm's reach, where you can inspect it, admire it, and eventually pick it without risking a broken neck. That is where the summer heading cut comes in. You do not have to wait for winter to keep your tree in check. If a branch shoots up beyond your reach, cut it back. Bring the whole canopy down to a manageable 6 or 7 feet. It feels aggressive, but the tree can handle it. When you make your cut, pay attention to the direction of the buds. Pomegranate branches alternate their offshoots, one left, one right. Always snip just above a bud that is facing outward. This forces the new growth to spread out like a goblet rather than growing inward and choking the center. You are essentially telling the tree to get wider, not taller. It keeps the fruit low, heavy, and accessible. But while summer pruning is about height, winter pruning is about structure. When the leaves finally fall, the tree reveals its skeleton. And that is when the real surgery begins. The winter skeleton. When the last yellow leaf drifts to the ground in late winter, the pomegranate tree finally reveals its secrets. It stands there naked, a skeleton of twisted wood, showing you exactly where it has been fighting with itself. This is the quiet season, the time when the real work happens, not with a watering can, but with a pruning saw. You have to step in and clear the clutter. Start with the obvious targets, the dead, the diseased, and the damaged wood, the 3 Ds that every old-school orchardist knows by heart. But then you have to look deeper. You will see branches crossing over one another, rubbing their bark raw in the wind, or twisting inward to choke the center of the plant. They are fighting for the same space, and you need to be the referee. Be ruthless. Your goal is to open up the middle of the bush, turning it into a vessel that can catch the sunlight. If the sun cannot reach the center, the fruit won't ripen there. You are essentially sculpting channels for the light to travel. It takes a bit of courage to cut away healthy wood, but you are playing the long game for a better harvest. Because once spring hits, you are not just growing leaves. You are growing strange, angular treasures that demand a very keen eye to harvest. The angular secret. If you ask a child to draw a fruit, they will almost always sketch a perfect circle. We are conditioned to think that round means ripe, pleasing to the eye, and ready to eat. But an old gardener knows that if a pomegranate looks like a perfect sphere, it is simply not ready for the table. A round fruit is a deception. It looks beautiful, but inside, it is likely tart and underdeveloped. The secret to harvesting lies in the angles. Inside that tough, leathery skin, hundreds of arrows are slowly filling with juice and sugar. As they swell, they begin to run out of room. They press hard against the rind, pushing it outward and distorting the fruit's shape. A truly ripe pomegranate stops looking like a ball and starts looking blocky, almost like a hexagon with flattened sides and distinct ridges. It looks a little irregular, perhaps even a bit ugly to the untrained eye. That is exactly what you want. You can also test it with your fingernail. The skin should feel a bit softer, less like hard plastic. It is a tactile language between the grower and the tree. But sometimes nature gets a little too enthusiastic. You might walk out one morning to find your best fruit has not just changed shape, but has cracked wide open. It looks like a ruined crop, but it is actually an urgent invitation. The split fruit dilemma. You walk out to the garden, expecting to find a perfect harvest, only to see your biggest, most beautiful pomegranate split wide open like a cracked vase. Your first instinct might be heartbreak, thinking the crop is ruined, but do not toss it on the compost heap just yet. That crack is actually nature ringing the dinner bell. It happens when the tree takes up a sudden surge of water, often after a heavy rain, or simply when the fruit becomes so packed with sweet juice that the leathery skin can no longer contain the internal pressure. It is essentially a sugar explosion. While a supermarket would reject it as damaged goods, a home gardener knows better. This split is proof that the arils inside are fully hydrated and bursting with sweetness. It is the best fruit on the tree, provided you are quick enough to claim it. You are now in a race against time. That open wound is an immediate beacon for ants, beetles, and mold. If you catch it early, while the fruit is still clean and the crack is fresh, harvest it immediately. It is perfectly safe to eat. If you wait even a day too long, the bugs will beat you to it, so grab your shears and claim your prize while you can. But once you get it into the kitchen, you face the final hurdle. Everyone loves the taste of a pomegranate, but almost everyone hates the mess of opening one. Fortunately, there is a simple trick that changes everything. The water bowl trick. Everyone loves eating pomegranates, but almost everyone dreads the battle of getting into one. For years, kitchen counters across America have looked like crime scenes, splattered with sticky red juice, all because we were never taught the proper way to unlock the vault. We used to slice them right down the middle, rupturing the seeds and creating a disaster. But there is a cleaner, smarter way that transforms the process from a headache into a simple, quiet task. You do not need to hack it open. You need to dismantle it. Take your knife and gently score the skin along the ridges, cutting just deep enough to penetrate the rind but not the fruit. Then, fill a large bowl with cool water and submerge the whole thing. This is the secret. Under the water, use your thumbs to pry the sections apart. The water acts as a shield, catching any stray sprays of juice before they stain your shirt. As you work the arils loose, a beautiful bit of physics takes over. The heavy, sweet seeds sink to the bottom of the bowl, while the bitter white pith floats to the top. It separates itself. When you are done, you just skim off the floating waste and drain the water. No mess, no stains. What remains at the bottom of the bowl is a pile of glistening rubies, clean and ready. It is the final step of the journey, and the reward is well worth the wait. The ruby reward. If you are ready to trade the grocery store line for a harvest of your own, go ahead and click that subscribe button and leave a link to help us grow. We have plenty more forgotten garden wisdom to dig up, and I would hate for you to miss what is coming next.